My phone rang on a regular Tuesday morning. The person on the other end gave me some bad news. My son's wedding planner called me to say I was no longer invited, but she told me to keep the money I paid for it. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I was in my office, looking at papers and numbers for my company, Sterling Hospitality Group. The company I started with my own hands. My assistant buzzed me, saying a wedding planner was on the line. The name of the company was Elegant Events. I was a bit confused because we didn't usually work with them, but they did use one of my hotels for their events. I picked up the phone. A woman's voice, smooth and practiced, greeted me. "Good morning, ma'am. I hope I'm not bothering you," she said. She sounded polite, but also a little fake. "I'm calling about the Henderson Miller wedding." I didn't say anything, so she kept talking. "I was told to remind you that the couple wants a very elegant and respectable feeling for their wedding. They want to avoid anything that might take away from that." Her words were clear. The meaning was also clear. I wasn't good enough. I was not part of the respectable picture. It felt like a cold knife had been pushed into my heart. She was saying I was not welcome. Then she gave me the final blow, but with an apology. "Ma'am, I am so sorry to tell you this, but your son asked me to tell you directly, so there would be no confusion." He said, "This day is about elegance and dignity, not about guilt and garbage from the past." I closed my eyes for a moment. Marcus, my son, the one I had raised from a baby after losing my other child at birth, was calling me garbage. He was saying I was a problem in his perfect world. I ended the call. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the city. I had helped build some of those tall buildings with my own money. I had put my life savings into this city and my company to give him a better future. But now that he had what he wanted, he was pushing me aside. I saw my own face in the window. A woman over 60, with no makeup or expensive hair. Just a quiet woman who had refused to give up. I never wanted thanks. I just wanted to be there, to be a part of his life. But on that day, just being there was not enough. The planner's words were polite, but what she was really saying was that I was a source of shame. That word, garbage, echoed in my mind. I thought of the $200,000 I had taken out of my savings to pay for the wedding. Marcus had cried on the phone, saying he would lose his love if the wedding didn't happen. He was afraid of being shamed for not having enough money. I wrote him a check without a single question. I never told anyone. I just gave him the money. I paid for all that elegance. And now he was throwing me out. I pushed a button on my desk. My assistant came in and asked if I needed anything. "Resume the board meeting," I said calmly. She nodded and left. I turned back to my computer screen, where all my company's numbers were waiting. Sterling Hospitality Group was doing very well. The business was making a lot of money. I picked up a pen and tapped it on my desk. My mind was still. I was silent. I didn't get angry. I didn't ask for an explanation. My silence was my answer. It was my way of showing that I knew Marcus had built his life on lies and had called his mother a problem, not a help. On the wall behind me was a photo of the first hotel I had bought 20 years ago. I bought it when Marcus was 11 because I didn't want him to feel poor compared to his friends. We made it a beautiful place for events. Now, that same place was going to host his wedding without me. I imagined it in my mind. The empty chairs, the flowers I had approved that morning, the staff wearing the uniforms my company made. Everything for the wedding was from my company, and yet the most important guest, me, was not invited. That's when I decided I would no longer pay to be invisible. I wrote an email to my assistant, Caitlin. It was short and to the point. Send them the invoice for cancellation. Process refunds for all guests. I am keeping the $200,000. Then I hit send. That email was more than just a message. It was a line in the sand. I paused for a moment. 3 minutes later, the board meeting started again. People who worked for me started making calls, quietly canceling everything. The wedding, which cost $500,000, disappeared from the schedule that day. The only person who knew all the details and had the power to stop it was me. I stood up and fixed my jacket. Nobody clapped or cheered. Power doesn't need to be loud. It works best in silence. I never needed people to say, I was right. I just wanted to be respected. And when that didn't happen, a quiet closing of a door was better than any hug. I looked at the city through the window again. The buildings that I had helped build seemed to be watching. I went back to the board meeting to talk about new business plans. Not a single word about Marcus. That part of my life was over. But in that silence, I felt a new feeling. It wasn't about being in control. It was about taking back my own story. I was no longer a shadow supporting my son. I was the woman who built the stage and refused to fade away. A few hours later, the office phone rang again. I answered it. I thought it might be a vendor, but it was Marcus. His voice was sharp and cold. I had given him everything: a childhood with enough food, a good education, and a future he thought was all his. Now that he had it all, he felt like he could throw me away. He started without a hello. You just can't help yourself, can you? He said. I let his words hang in the air like a broken bridge. I waited. He kept talking, each word a new insult. This is exactly why I didn't want you there, Mom. You suck the joy out of every room you enter. His voice was a weapon that day. He said, trash doesn't belong at the table just because it once bought the meal. I didn't say anything. I hung up the phone. The click of the line, ending, was the final goodbye. 8 years before, I had written an agreement. I would give Marcus 20% of Sterling Hospitality Group as a wedding gift. It was worth over $30 million. I had signed the papers and kept them secret. I never told anyone. I believed that a mother's greatest gift was doing what needed to be done without telling everyone. I kept the signed contract in a drawer. It was a promise I made before he turned on me. That promise died the moment he called me trash. I took the papers out of the drawer and ripped them into pieces. I tore them again and again until they were just small bits of paper. The goodbye was in the tearing. Just then, there was a soft knock on the door. Not the loud knock of a boss, but a gentle one. It was my daughter, the one I had found 5 years ago. On the night Marcus was born, he was given to me by mistake. My real daughter was born that same night, but she was given to another family. 5 years ago, she found me. It wasn't a big, messy reunion. She just came to my office and told me she knew I was her mother. I had already forgiven her for her absence. Today, she came wearing jeans and carrying a small bunch of daisies. She was there for Marcus. She had asked for an invitation, hoping to bring the family back together. She just wanted to wish him well. She sat quietly in the chair behind me, a silent witness. I didn't turn to her. I let her presence speak for itself. Then, the phone rang again. Marcus was calling back, as if the line had never been cut. He repeated his insults. You think money can fix everything, but you were never a mother to me. He said I was not welcome and had already signed away my place in his life. I didn't say a word. I held my hand in a tight fist, my knuckles turning white. My daughter whispered, "He cannot speak for you, Mom. Let me be your voice." I didn't argue. Later, I learned that she had stepped in front of a hidden camera to join the call from my line. Her voice was steady. "He has no right to speak for me." She pressed the button to hang up. That one action, my daughter standing up to her brother's cruelty, was more powerful than any tears or threats. "Can he really say that about you?" she asked quietly. I stood and turned to face her. I held out the ripped pieces of the contract. 20%, I said, signed 6 years ago, but promises are only good if the people who make them are good. I expected her to be quiet, but instead, she looked at me with a kind of pride I had never felt before. She carefully took the pieces and put them in her pocket. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. She picked up the flowers she had dropped in shock and offered them to me. "Open them if you wish," she said. For the first time, I didn't feel the sadness of a lost child. I held the flowers, and my hand did not shake. Our office was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of understanding. I walked to the window, and she stood beside me. She didn't cry. She just rested her shoulder against mine. I felt the pulse of the city below us. I felt the pain of being uninvited, and the cost of finally not being invisible. My heart didn't break again. It grew. Marcus had thrown every insult he could think of, but he was wrong. His invitations would never matter to me again. The family he tried to build without me now had no room for him. But my daughter and I would walk forward quietly and with dignity. My debts were paid. My honor was back. From my desk drawer, I took out an envelope with her name on it. I handed it to her without a word. She opened it and saw her name written by me. The note inside said, "I love you and I choose you." She touched her lips and looked up at me. We didn't need to say anything else. We sat in silence until my assistant knocked again. I told her to take the rest of the day off. "I will handle things from here," I said. My daughter and I walked out together, our steps in sync. We were two women who would never again let the word garbage be used against us. I closed the door to my office and called Caitlin back on her private line. My voice was calm. "Cancel the wedding. The venue, flowers, hotel, food, everything." I didn't need to shout. There was a moment of silence on the other end. She finally spoke, her voice shaking. "But ma'am, you are not the bride or groom." I waited. I let her words hang in the air. Finally, I replied, "And who owns Elegant Events?" She stammered. I asked again, "Owned by Sterling Event Holdings, correct?" I didn't let her answer. "And who owns Sterling Event Holdings?" There was a long pause. She finally whispered, "Sterling Hospitality Group?" I said, "Yes, and I am the sole owner and CEO of that group." Another pause. She whispered, "I had no idea." I didn't say thank you or criticize her. I just said, "Send cancellation notices to all vendors. Issue refunds for all services. Send the bill to the Henderson Miller family, but keep the $200,000 deposit. They will keep it as the cancellation fee." I hung up without another word. My team, my legal group, my managers, everyone started to work. The whole wedding was canceled. The rehearsal dinner, the limousines, the flowers, everything. The whole plan for the wedding fell apart with just one sentence from me. I sat in my chair, my hands folded. I didn't cry or brag. I was quiet. I knew that power didn't need people to clap for it. I saw my face in the window again, a woman who had built everything in silence. My actions were not a loud protest. They were a decision they could not ignore. Later that day, my CFO came to my office. He said, "Yes, ma'am. The wedding is canceled. Refunds have been sent. The $200,000 deposit is safe in your account." I nodded once. I didn't correct him or explain anything. I already knew. I called my assistant back in. She confirmed that all the notices had been sent. I told her, thank them for being so quiet about it, and tell them to go back to work. She nodded and left. I remembered the day I signed the papers to give Marcus 20% of my company. I had done it with so much pride. Now, I felt no sadness about tearing it up. That contract was a symbol of his entitlement, and I no longer saw any reason to keep it. He wouldn't have understood what it meant. He would have just used it. The desk under my hands had seen my hopes and my broken heart. I stood up and looked around the room at the things that showed my life's work. A model of my first hotel, a plaque for 10 years of success, photos of parties. These things didn't need me to defend them with words. Their presence showed their value. All I needed to show was that I would no longer pay to be invisible. No one came in to clap for me. The power of my call was in how final and perfect it was. The chair that was supposed to be for me at the wedding dinner was now empty. I imagined the guests looking around. They would feel the loss. The wedding was over. It was too late to fix it. The Henderson Millers would now have to deal with the stress and problems they had caused. That was not my problem. I went back to looking at my company's numbers. They looked good. My company was growing. My legacy was not a single wedding or a single son. It was a whole network of hotels and businesses. I had built it quietly, carefully, and with the knowledge that you have to pay a price when you choose to be silent instead of loud. Silence is not being absent. It is being in control of when and how you speak. That night, I left the office as the streetlights came on. I went to my small apartment. My keys made a gentle sound. My cactus, which I had for many years, stood by the window, strong and steady. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the plant. The city outside hummed, not knowing that a quiet command from my company had just changed everything. I opened a letter that had come today. It was from Caitlin. It was the cancellation invoice and a note. Your instructions were clear, ma'am. I have sent everything. I am sorry this had to end this way. I placed it next to my husband's framed wedding photo. I didn't feel bad. I felt a sense of closure. In the morning, I would write a note to my daughter. I would tell her not to worry about money or contracts. She would come later that day with her daisies and ask for nothing more than to stand by me. I would give her the pieces of the contract with her brother's name on it and ask her to put it in my desk. She would forgive me, not for breaking a promise, but for finally seeing what kind of promise should never have been made. I drank the last of my tea and stood up. The city lights began to twinkle. My door closed softly, and with it, one part of my life was over. What was left was my power, my dignity, and the quiet knowledge that my power was not loud, but unbreakable. The truth came out, not with a big show, but with an absence. Empty chairs and unpaid bills. My company was never mentioned by name. The truth went around without a press release. Invoices were leaked. One florist wrote, "The CEO of Sterling pulled the plug. The whole contract is gone." A catering manager wrote, "We got a cancellation notice from Sterling. They said they owned all the vendors and wouldn't risk their brand." A local newspaper wrote a short headline, "Elegant event suddenly canceled. Company owner said to be involved." The paper said that the person who made the decision was the groom's mother, who was also the CEO of the company. No one quoted me. I didn't need to say anything. The truth came out on its own. The next day, articles talked about how I had set a new example for how to deal with wedding contracts. People talked about who really has the power in a wedding. One post said it was a business decision, not an emotional one. Hundreds of people liked the post. There were no fights online or drama, just business. The guests, who all got their money back, posted notes saying, "You can't serve food if you don't exist." That day never happened. My company's internal newsletter listed all the vendors that were canceled and the refunds that were given. Everyone in the company got the email. No one sent it to the news. They understood that being real doesn't need a spotlight. It needs honesty. The cancellation became a lesson for other companies. It was a lesson about what happens when one company owns all the parts of an event. In a few hours, all the vendors, from photographers to florists, sent letters saying they had been paid in full for the cancellations. The letters said, "We must cancel your services," but the instructions came from the CEO. The price tag was clear. No angry words, no lawsuits, just accounting. Every penny was written down. Every refund was checked off. Refunds for 220 hotel rooms, 80 chairs, flowers, food, all canceled and recorded. That night, a local gossip newsletter had a short post, "Wedding canceled at a sterling venue. Groom's mother is said to be the one who decided." But then it disappeared. The reporters moved on to new stories. But at other events, vendors would say quietly, "She did it. She walked away," when she could have just paid. I sat in my apartment that night, opening the mail. A thank you note from a couple whose deposit had been returned, with an apology for the trouble. I also got many letters from strangers who had seen pictures of the empty hall online and felt that justice had happened. None of them asked for me to talk to the cameras. Justice didn't need to be nice when it had power on its side. Later, I lay in bed, listening to the city. I felt empty and full at the same time. The cancellation happened just as I knew it would, quietly and with purpose. My power was not for show. My voice had been heard by the only people who mattered. I closed my eyes. The next chapter, if there was one, would not be about money or contracts. I felt no victory, just a quiet sense of peace. The feeling of someone who had finally been removed from the category of guilt or garbage without begging for it. My company kept going. Guests found other things to do. But no one tried to have that wedding again. And that was the whole point. A wedding that was unbuilt by the people who built it is like a lie that has been exposed in a boardroom. The truth doesn't need applause. It needs to be certain. I heard from Marcus only a few hours after everyone found out. My phone lit up with a message from him. "You've humiliated us. You killed my wedding." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my desk drawer and took out a small photo of my own wedding day with my husband years ago. I slid Marcus's message into a plastic cover, so the words would never fade. I put it in the same box as my old wedding photo. My wedding ring, which I had sold to help pay for his wedding, was also in that box. I didn't cry then. I didn't feel like I had one. I just nodded to myself, knowing that words can hurt more than not being there. Later that day, my birth daughter, Elena, sent me an email asking to meet. We met 3 hours later at a private room in my flagship hotel, Harborview Resort. It was a beautiful room with a view of the water, but it was empty of celebration. I went in and closed the door. I saw them. Marcus was sitting there, his hands clenched. My ex-husband and the woman who was going to be Marcus's wife were standing. She had tears in her eyes. My daughter sat beside me, calm. The woman who was Marcus's wife spoke first. "We are sorry, all of us. I believed him about you, and I never asked the truth. I should have spoken up." My ex-husband's voice was shaking. "I apologize for every time my pride blinded me. I didn't see you, only what our son wanted to believe." Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice shaking. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting my image of success, but I didn't protect anything. I only hurt you." He paused. "Why didn't you ever tell us who you were?" I looked at Marcus without anger. I had to decide what was the right thing to say. I replied, "Because if you had loved me, you would have invited me without knowing. You didn't need proof. You just needed love and presence." There was silence. My daughter squeezed my hand. Marcus wiped his face with a handkerchief. You had 20% of that company with your signature on it. I know that now. I never even asked. My ex-husband leaned forward. We should have seen past all the fancy things and seen the values you taught us. His wife nodded, her eyes red. I saw the contracts on your desk once, she said. I thought it was someone else. I regret it every day. There was no show from me. I didn't accept their apologies with loud words. I just looked at them and listened. I stood up and said quietly, there is nothing more to forgive. You looked away when fake things seemed brighter than the real ones. You chose show over substance. I stepped away and placed the framed message from Marcus, the one that said, "You killed my wedding," in the middle of the table. They all stared at it. Their regret felt heavy enough to just sit there. Then I turned to my daughter. "Elena, you may grow this company however you wish. Your brother's seat is now empty. It is for you." She took a deep breath and nodded. I said again, to everyone in the room, we will walk the rest of the way together, but the truth is not up for debate. I left before they could reply. I went back to my apartment that night. I put Marcus's message back in the box with the photo and the ring. Those words belonged there. I drank tea on my balcony next to my cactus. No celebration, no big announcement, just silence filled with finality. In the morning, we would talk about business. But that night, I didn't care about money or reports. I only cared that they had looked at me. For once, I was the thing they saw in their own reflection. I closed the lid of the box and held it close. The apologies were still there, not as a final answer, but as the first small sign of change. Elena sat beside me at the long wooden table, sunlight on her face. She had not asked for anything. Not thanks, not recognition. But she came when others turned their backs. She stood with me when my name was taken off the guest list, not to fight, but because the truth was just a part of who she was. I slid a folder across the table to her. She looked at the company logo on the front, and then up at me. "What's this?" she asked softly. Her voice was steady, just like mine was 30 years ago when I started the company. I pointed to the papers inside. "It is a transfer of 20% ownership," I said. "Voting shares, decision rights, a seat at the table." She opened the folder slowly. Her hands shook, not because she was greedy or surprised, but because of something deeper. I leaned back and folded my hands. "This is not because you defended me," I said. "It is because you never asked me to prove who I was. You never needed proof before you gave me your hand." She took a deep breath and closed the folder carefully. "Thank you," she whispered. I reached across the table and touched her hand. "You are my daughter, not just by blood. You are mine because you saw me when the world saw nothing." She didn't cry. Neither did I. But the room held a feeling that no business meeting had ever held. A feeling of forever. Weeks passed. Plans were made. Elena's wedding was quiet and elegant, not like the big show her brother had wanted. She chose the Grand Harbor, the same hotel Marcus thought was for his big moment. Now, it was not a symbol of money, but of things being set right. She asked me to walk her down the aisle. I gently said no. "This is your day," I told her. "Not a time to fix old things." Instead, I came early. I wore a dark blue dress, not black, and put a small white flower on my chest. I sat 3 rows back, not in the front where family sits, but in a spot where the view was soft and honest. I folded my hands in my lap and watched. The ceremony was in the garden. The morning light was golden. Elena walked down the aisle with her head held high. The man by her side was kind and quiet, just as I had hoped. No one said who paid for the flowers or the music. It was a wedding about being present, not about pretending. During the promises, Elena turned to the guests. "There is someone here who taught me that love is not about being loud. It's about being constant, she said. Her voice was steady. She is not in the front row, but she has always stood beside me. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely seen. After the ceremony, guests mingled under white tents. I stayed on the side. No cameras followed me. No one gave speeches about me. Elena came through the crowd, laughing, shining, and stopped by me for a moment. She took my hand in both of hers. "I am so glad you came," she said. "I never thought of not coming." I replied. She nodded. "Me neither." As the evening went on, I left quietly. No one noticed, and I liked it that way. I walked alone through the lobby of the hotel I owned, past the chandelier I had chosen years ago. I got to the elevator and pressed the button, feeling a calm that only comes from having nothing left to prove. In my room, I took off my shoes and sat by the window. The city lights blinked in the distance. I thought of Marcus, what could have been, what was said, what was lost. And then I thought of Elena, my daughter, who came back, of the name that was no longer a secret, but was spoken with pride. That night, I wrote a letter not to be sent, just to be kept. "Dear Elena, you reminded me that the truth doesn't need a stage, that dignity is in the quietest things. You never asked me to prove I mattered. You just made a space for me to matter. This company will be yours one day, not because you are my blood, but because you have the values that built every brick of it. That is a real legacy, not money, but character." I put the letter in the box with the photo, the wedding ring, the sealed message from Marcus, and the transfer papers. The box was heavier now, not with sadness, but with clarity. I turned off the light and slept peacefully. Marcus never called again. No apology, no second chance, no sadness. After the wedding fell apart, and his name started to be talked about as the son who bit the hand that fed him, he just disappeared. I guess that's one way to deal with shame, by just disappearing into silence, by letting his pride become a cage. He no longer existed in my family records, only as a note in an old adoption file. Case closed. To the world, he became a small detail. To me, he became a stranger I once raised. But I didn't feel sad for him. You can't be sad for someone who chose to bury you. And Marcus had buried me long before that wedding. He just didn't know I was the root, not the weed. Elena stood at the head of the boardroom table the next month. I didn't give her the seat. I gave it to her. She read every file, asked every question, and walked through our hotels like someone who wasn't trying to impress, but to understand. She wasn't trained for the job, but she was born for it. And when the time came, I stepped back. Not down, just back. Not into nothing, but into a new purpose. That fall, I took out $5 million, not from my company, but from my own money. Quietly, carefully, I used the money to start something I had dreamed of for years. The Silent Seat Foundation. It's a fund for mothers who were erased by pride, by betrayal, by families that used them and threw them away when they were no longer useful. It provides education, housing, and legal help to women whose love was made invisible until their absence was felt too late. At the launch party, Elena stood beside me in a simple blue suit. She didn't wear a big title on her chest. She let her actions speak for themselves. The press was small. That was on purpose. No loud party, no famous people. Just a podium, a seal, and a room full of women who had been told they were too much, too old, or not important. She started her speech by holding my hand. She didn't want applause. She wanted to be honest. The room became very quiet as she paused, and even the reporters leaned forward. Elena adjusted the microphone, looked at the small crowd, and began. My mother never raised her voice, but the world finally heard her. A silence followed, a respectful one, not an empty one. She continued, there are mothers who sat in hospital rooms alone, who paid for graduations, but were cut out of the photos, who built futures, but were called problems. This foundation exists because their love deserves more than a memory. It deserves a place. It deserves safety, business plans, and a future. She pointed to me. This woman built an empire not out of being angry, but out of being absent. Every room she was kept out of, she built a better one. And now those rooms are open to others. I didn't cry, but my hands held the chair a little tighter, not from pain, but because the feeling of being seen is heavy when you have carried yourself alone for so long. That night, after everyone had left and the lights were low, Elena and I walked through the halls of the first hotel I had ever bought. I told her how I used to sleep in the office during renovations, how I dealt with problems during big events, how I stood in the banquet hall one night after a broken engagement and whispered, "This will matter one day." She put her arm through mine. "It matters now," she said. Outside, the streetlights blinked like quiet applause. No reporters were waiting. No family came asking for forgiveness. Just a mother and daughter walking through the empire they built, not from bitterness, but from truth. And somewhere, I imagine Marcus still tells himself a version of the story where he was wronged. That is his right. But this legacy is mine. And now it belongs in the right hands. If you were ever cut out of a family photo, if you were ever asked not to ruin a wedding with your presence, then this story was for you. Because garbage doesn't write the family story. The ones who write it are the ones who paid for it and paid the price in silence. Not every mother makes noise. Some build empires behind closed doors. Some write their love in actions, not demands. And when the world finally sees them, it is not because they shouted. It is because they stood and never moved.